presentation? Oh.
Just like, it's just going to be really quick. I'm just going to talk, basically. So basically, welcome, everybody. For those of you who don't know, this event is sponsored by Cryptokitties, which is very exciting. Make sure to grab some swag on the way out. It's all right there. And yeah, perfect. So I am from Lighthouse Labs, which is hosting this event. We are a coding school that teach people how to become software developers, as probably some of you know in here. I see a lot of alum. So our full-time courses are our Web Development Bootcamp and our iOS Development Bootcamp. And our part-time courses are Intro to Web Development, Intro to iOS Development, Intro to Front End with JavaScript, and then our new one is Blockchain for Developers, which is a part-time course that is once a week for 12 weeks, and it kind of teaches people how to become smart contract writers on blockchain. So that is kind of the focus of it, and we are really excited to start it. It starts in September. So if you guys are interested, you can come talk to me or Emma in the back. We are both Lighthouse Labs employees, and we'll be able to give you a little bit more information about it. But that is kind of the reasoning behind this panel, is that we wanted to get the blockchain word out. So that is what's going on with us. And then Rama, I will pass it over to you.
I think let's come start. I don't usually read from, she gave me already the new bio, but I'm like, you know what, that doesn't make sense. We have very small crowd here. We would like to know more about, first, them. Know who's in the room, who's our audience, and after we can start introducing yourself. So let's start. Who's a developer? All right. Who's he's raising his hand. It's like, okay. Who's a blockchain developer? Who's an engineer? All right. Good to know. And who's looking for a new job? If your employer is here, so please don't raise your hand. All right. So great. Thank you for letting us know. So we'll start with introducing yourself. What do you do? No, just a small introduction. Let's start with Matt.
Sure. Hi, I'm Matt. I worked at a few different blockchain companies here in Vancouver, and then I decided to kind of go out on my own and just consult independently. Been doing that for about 3 months, and yeah, that's what I do now. I was just arrived from Europe yesterday, so take it slow.
Bit tired. Hi everyone, my name is Patrick. I'm a blockchain developer at Ether Party, which is part of Vanbex over, it's really close to here. I've been with the company now for about a year and a half. Been working with this guy. It's been a tough time with him. And yeah, I also gave a few courses with Blockchain UBC in terms of just Ethereum as a whole and the technicals, and also just the smart contract development of it. And I'm really happy to be on this panel. One question that I just wanted to ask, how many of you guys actually either have interacted or owned crypto? Interesting. Cool.
So almost we have educated.
Yeah, that's
So
good.
that's
That's
very
good.
good.
Awesome.
Who's got a Cryptokitty? Awesome.
All right.
Hopefully all of them soon.
I'm Nick. I'm a front-end engineer at Axiom, or nowadays Cryptokitties. So Axiom is a venture studio, and we are the company that founded Cryptokitties, the idea. Cryptokitties eventually launched and received investment, and it's now its own company. So a bit of a gray area there on the division of where you actually are, but front-end engineer at Axiom and Cryptokitties.
All right, cool. So we wanted to ask, how did you get involved in programming and coding? Yeah.
I had a t-shirt company about 6 years ago. I was designing and selling apparel, and I wanted to do e-commerce website for my shop, so I started Googling how to build websites, and then I learned. A few months later, I was selling my t-shirts online, and then a few years later, I was a front-end developer. So that's just kind of the trajectory. as time went on, I moved from web development into, I guess, a more broader front-end development, which is more like application-driven as opposed to just website-driven. And almost 3 years ago, I applied for a job at Axiom. They accepted my application, and I joined them. And a year and a half ago, I moved to Vancouver. I was working remotely for them for a year before I came.
Awesome. So on my end, I started out actually as I was just studying physics. I love physics in general. Anything like that is amazing. But I figured out at one point that the research side of it is not my forte whatsoever. I always thought I had the dream of becoming a theoretical physicist. And as this reality was getting more and more real, turns out that's not what I wanted to do whatsoever. But while doing my curriculum, essentially, you had to learn a bit of C, C++, MATLAB, whatnot. And I really just always loved computers, so I kept hacking away at that. Also, I think it was around the same time that I learned about blockchain. But I just kept it going, and then to actually refine my skills and get faster and deeper into it, I actually went through Lighthouse Labs in Montreal. And then from there, it all snowballed. I worked as a backend engineer, a backend developer at a e-commerce. Did that for a while, and then afterwards was contracted out from Montreal as a smart contract developer. I learned myself, and then from there moved to Vancouver. And here I am.
I was lucky enough to go to a school where in kindergarten we had those 1984 like black and white Macintoshes, the one that was supposed to change the world. Anyway, I played with those when I was a kid, and then I kind of like went in and out of sort of just casual like hobbyist programming all through like up until throughout high school. Actually, when I was like 15 and 16, I was actually working online with guys that I didn't even know on basically video game mods, if you guys remember like Quake mods and things like that. So we were like scripting things and building levels and stuff. But this was all still just like hobbyist stuff, no formal training. Then I basically like made websites for people as a hobby, and then I bounced around on a few different trajectories in post-secondary, and then finally someone just said to me, hey, like you can make websites. And I had this weird like rebellious kind of attitude, like I was like, university's not gonna teach me anything I don't already know about programming and things like that. But then my friend was like, look, why don't you just take the path of least resistance and just get that piece of paper? So then I went to UBC and basically got a comp sci degree. More academia after that, university lecturing, things like that. And then I got into blockchain because a couple of guys told me they wanted to start a venture studio for like frontier tech, which would be like everything from blockchain AI to like AR, VR stuff. And then they ended up pivoting into kind of something I wasn't really interested in, into just one product. So then I left, and that's when I joined Vanbex group. So I worked on the consulting side, so not the Ether Party product side, just for a bunch of different clients for 9 months, and that kind of gave me like a breadth of the space. So I got to kind of work on a bunch of different interesting challenges and stuff. Early stage, kind of like figuring out the token mechanics of these different projects. And then I decided to go independent just for more time flexibility and kind of just choosing my own projects. And I forgot to mention, since we're here at the Lighthouse Labs event, I was actually helping out the Toronto version of the blockchain developer camp. So I've been flying, we're Lighthouse friendly. I was actually flying back and forth. There was a Toronto cohort, and they're doing their final projects right now, and I was flying back and forth to teach some of the Solidity, like more hands-on Solidity stuff. So that's cool. Yeah.
All right, great, thank you.
It's a good course.
So I'll ask you a question. What do you know what's blockchain? Who do you know what blockchain is? Okay. We're here maybe a couple of them, and we're here for you guys.
Yeah.
So what's blockchain? So let's start.
So I know like the buzzwords and the things, like I know sort of from the outside what it's supposed to do. So it's a distributed trustless ledger. The idea being that it's kind of like it's sort of you have a series of transactions. And if someone tries to mess with it, it's going to be very clear, oh, this isn't valid with the version everybody else has. It's not centralized the way that like a bank's database would be, or like the kind of the classic, like, oh, there's one database that has everyone's accounts and that's where it is. And so, yeah, you get to know, like, if someone tries to mess with the version account, that would like work the same way.
Anyone would like to add? Thank you. Anyone would like to add for what's here?
Don't be shy.
I mean, I think that's pretty right. Yeah, everybody has a copy of the ledger, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Do you need anything?
Yeah, like that each block contains like some sort of data and it has like some kind of hash, and we also has like some hash that's like linked to the previous block before it. So,
Yeah, that's
All right, let's hear from you guys. So if you would like to add anything, you wanted to introduce our,
Sure.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so this is one thing that I've been struggling a lot with, just explaining what blockchain is to regular people, your friends, your family. My mom still has no idea what I'm doing. But my version, the simplest way, and then we can add on to that, is that I call it the stupidest database in the world, because it is, everyone has a copy of it. It's very inefficient in that way, but at the same time, what that means is that you have a certain set of rules for how to add a new transaction or a new piece of data inside that database. And that everyone agrees by those rules, and everyone understands that if one person tries to add the wrong information, everyone disagrees with that, and then it's not updated. That's the lower level aspect of it. If you go more technical, you can just call it a linked list. It's all it is. You start with the Genesis block. Genesis block just means the first one, block 0, right? It has a certain piece of data, and in Bitcoin, it says it's the headline of that day, January 1st, 09, I think, something like that. What?
January 2nd.
Second, 09. And has it was very interesting because the headline on that point was about the market downturn because of the housing market problem. Very interesting start. But so you've got that, and then all the blocks subsequent to that are just linked together by what's called a hash. So you need a cryptographic hash function. But just think about it as the fingerprint of the block beforehand, and then you add that fingerprint to the one in front, just saying that they're linked together, and then everyone's like, cool, sounds good, let's keep it going. And the more blocks you have, the harder it is to overwrite what's happening. There's always a possibility to overwrite. We don't need to get more into detail for that. But the more blocks you have, what they're called confirmations, the more sure you are that your transaction is in there. I went a bit low here. I don't know if you want
I
to
think you
dumb it down a bit more.
You would like to add anything, Matt?
Yeah, so Merkle trees, no. I'm not thinking about any weird computer science stuff. But no, I think a lot of bits and pieces were already mentioned. One thing that can be easy to kind of understand it. So blockchain is actually the definition, technically, of the database. What you mentioned, it's sort of, there's a bunch of data in a block, and this data is basically, the database is transactional, so it builds up for the Genesis block, like Patrick explained. So the data in the block is basically hashed, and then there's a signature, and it's included in the next block, and then once that block is sort of agreed upon by everyone in the network, basically it's hashed as well, and then so on and so forth. So that by including the signature from the previous block in the next block, and then making that making the network have to mine the block or achieve consensus, which is something we're kind of glossing over here. That in fact creates that whole blockchain thing. So the blockchain aspect of it is really the database, but you see people refer to blockchain networks or blockchain technology. And there's a lot of other different other components there, like how does the network achieve consensus? You might have heard of proof of work or proof of stake or delegated proof of stake. So these are just different ways that the network kind of comes to an understanding of which block is going to be accepted next, and then basically forming kind of the version of the future that everyone agrees on. So that's the one thing I would just kind of add on, was just that this is sort of it wasn't that it was just one technology that just went poof out of nowhere. It was actually an amalgam of a bunch of different technologies that had existed, and it was just, for the case of Bitcoin, it was actually the magic was putting it together in this really elegant construction that allowed basically Bitcoin to boot up on January 2nd, 2009, and basically never stop. So yeah, it's quite a fascinating technology.
At its core, do you guys understand, like, how do you participate in the network? Do you guys know that? Like, just, it's software, right? That's all it is, right? So you just download a piece of software that's open sourced, and it can run on your computer, and it will connect to the other nodes, meaning the other people that are running the same software, and you guys will reach the same state, or like you guys will get the same information at one point. So it's very simple, it's open, right? I can just go in, grab my computer, download it from GitHub, start it, and I'm part of the network now. I'm part of I'm validating the network.
I got a quick analogy for that. Basically, it's like BitTorrent, except you're all connecting to the same movie, and you're all deciding on how the movie should be made. Like,
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that.
I like my metaphors.
I like that. That's good.
Would you like to add anything?
I was just going to touch on the distributed or decentralized aspect of it. We spoke about kind of the technical layer, but in traditional systems, Gmail, anything that you use on a day-to-day basis, when you request any piece of data, you are asking Google to retrieve that piece of information from one of their data centers and give it back to you. So if all of you were using Gmail and I was Google, you're all asking me for that piece of information. I can do whatever I want to really, you know. You just trust me to give you the accurate data, but I can just be an anarchist tomorrow and tell you to fuck off, you know. But with blockchain and with distributed technology, what we're saying is that no one person is that entity. Everybody is responsible for participating. And as a result of everybody's participation, we're able to build up this trustlessness. And trustlessness doesn't mean that you don't trust anybody. It means that you don't need to trust somebody to believe what you're getting is true. Because everybody's participating and everybody has a copy of up-to-date data and accurate data, and everybody's ultimate interest is to maintain that, then you can safely believe that what you retrieve from your node will be verified by the other nodes around and given back to you. And that's trustlessness, and that's kind of distribution or decentralization aspect of it.
Any questions?
It can lead us to the next question, which is why blockchain is popular. Let's see. Why do you think it's right now popular?
I don't know. Does anybody here think blockchain is actually popular?
I think it
No,
is.
seriously.
I think it is.
And why?
I've done like keyword searching on Google, and I see that trend. Ever since like cryptocurrency went up, blockchain went up too.
Right.
I mean, you may be aware that I think it was about last year, the last Vancouver startup weekend. That's when I heard about it, and that's when I looked got into it. It was because of cryptocurrencies.
Yeah. So my stance on the popularity of blockchain right now is a bit strange. I have a little bit of a strange relationship with it because I know that the popularity of it right now is purely due to speculation. But what I believe blockchain can actually achieve in the long term has very little to do with cryptocurrency and inflation and people making $1 million overnight, you know. That being said, like the cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all these buzzwords and stuff have increased the popularity of blockchain, which is good for us as developers because now it's allowing us to put our ideas into the minds of venture capitalists or like Fortune 500 companies or whatever. Yeah, listen, here are actual real-world applications of blockchain. Are you interested? And a lot of them are. A lot of them kind of have this aha moment where they're like, oh, it's not just about cryptocurrency. There's actually a lot more to it. You know, the whole decentralization and the trustlessness aspect of it is actually what's important. And I think that will ultimately be the long-standing kind of pillar of blockchain as opposed to cryptocurrency itself.
Sorry, probably not question time yet,
Sure.
but don't you think not the popularity, but the interest, I guess, in cyber criminals using ransomware, and because of that, people want to get their data back, and so they are buying cryptocurrency and paying to get their data back. And doesn't that increase the Bitcoin? Wow, I should have thought about how to phrase this question before I asked it. Doesn't that make it a little bit more popular? Wouldn't it make it seem so that cryptocurrencies can't really ever decrease because people will always be trying to pay to get their money back if they don't have cybersecurity?
Okay, well,
Everyone.
That's an interesting
Well,
question.
Can we keep it to the end?
We sure
Yeah,
can.
we can't
Table that.
just keep moving with
No, I
it.
can answer it really quickly,
Okay,
actually.
let's
So
do
I
that.
just listened to a podcast with Laura Shin. She's like, she has this thing called Unchained or Unconfirmed. There's two of them. Basically, it was like how much, how much fraud or whatever is like actually existing in cryptocurrency. And to be honest, like it's actually very little. The speculation is a huge part of it. So basically, traders, day traders, all sorts of people. There are people who are trying to hide their money from taxation. There's people trying to avoid inheritance tax in South Korea, for example. These are huge movers. People in China were trying to get their money out. That's why they accounted for so much of the Bitcoin holding and mining also back in the day. Well, that's also because they can manufacture those ASIC chips really fast, the little toasters that mine Bitcoin. Basically, the long and the short of it is, so you raise an interesting point. Will more people having to get cryptocurrency lead to a rise in cryptocurrency prices? Absolutely. It's just sort of, basic supply and demand. And that's what's sort of been driving the run-up, and that was what was driving the price run-up last year. There's a lot of like retail money coming into the space, so basically like everyone and their dog was downloading this Coinbase app on their iPhone and basically connecting their Visa and like chucking some money at it. So just like, some well-to-do like tech dudes like hanging out in San Francisco or in Brooklyn or whatever, downloading it, throwing like $2,500 at it. I mean, that does, if enough people do it and it becomes like a fad, then it does kind of raise prices. There's also some really weird market manipulation stuff that happens because the markets are so new, they're unregulated. There's all this like manipulation going on with like these Bitcoin whales and things like that, and like this sort of tether USD, like wash trading. Like, is it really backed by US dollars? I don't know. There's all sorts of stories. The answer is nobody really knows. But the actual sort of holding ransomware and that being in demand for cryptocurrency, that's not a huge part of it. Most people actually don't really pay those ransoms, or if they do, the ransoms are really low. Like they're asking for like a couple of grand or like $10,000 because they know that people will just give it up, and that's not that much in the market.
And I'd like to add to that, like in terms of the ransomware and stuff, like actually, so back when I know a lot of people started learning about Bitcoin back when it was a Silk Road. Bitcoin was used for payment there and stuff. It's probably one of the worst modes of payment that you can do if you're a drug dealer or anything like that, because it's incredibly easy to track. That's the main thing, is like where it's kind of going. Well, of course, there's other ones out there like Zcash and things like that make it way harder, kind of almost even impossible. But it has a bad light for the wrong reasons. Like a lot of those drug dealers back then for Silk Road and stuff, they got caught because straight up they did everything in Bitcoin. They thought it was anonymous. No, it's pseudonymous. That's the big difference here. It's pseudonymous. You have a string of number that's your address, and that's what you have. That's you. But it can still be attached to you. It's not anonymous. So yeah, it kind of has a bad light on that aspect. I'd say.
All right, so right now we know what's blockchain. So let's ask the audience
We
here.
also know how to buy drugs.
Let's ask the audience, do you know like what blockchain can solve? What's the key problems blockchain can solve? Anybody like to add or say something? Yeah,
Well,
just-
one big one is like chain of custody and logistics, right? So tracking packages, keeps around.
tracking.
instantly disrupt, right?
So supply chain.
All right, that's a good one.
Yeah, I think it's where you don't need any, I mean, you want to avoid any intermediary like financial transaction. That's one of the biggest.
Yeah, anybody else would like to add?
Voting.
Voting, yeah, that's other one, other good one. Anyone else? Let's go back to you. So you
Yeah,
more-
so a lot of things were just mentioned. So supply chain logistics. So let's say you had, until you get your cup of coffee, there's, maybe the coffee beans are touching 8 to 9 different parties, right? Now each one of them has to make a financial transaction. So, from the farmer to, the distributor that he loads them all, like loads a bunch of coffee bags on a truck. There's some financial transaction that has to take place. Could take place in cash, but probably not. Like it's probably some sort of some sort of debit credit system, and who's involved in that? It's the bank, right? And they're going to take a little rent on that. And then basically the farmer doesn't have access to their data anymore, about where these bags of coffee beans go, but they go off on the trucks. And then the distributor kind of, maybe they send them to different roasters because different roasters paid for them. They're like, I want these beans, I want those beans, right? So then they arrive, and then there's more random financial transactions, and there's a little cut, like a little rent taken, 2%, 3%. You don't think it's much, but then it adds up all the way along the process. Now, when you finally get your cup of coffee, you don't know where those beans have been. They've got some stamp on them from some other trusted third party. It's maybe it says it's fair trade, maybe it says it's organic. Who knows, right? So the idea there would be that basically all these parties along the way could basically just agree to use the same protocol for how they kind of exchange their goods, for sort of finances. And actually, one thing that's interesting is financial transactions is kind of one of the first ideas because it's built into kind of what Bitcoin was, which is electronic peer-to-peer cash. But there could be other ways to kind of build these systems. And I mean, money can change hands, and sure, there might be a fee taken for the money exchange, but you could still track the data. So there's lots of other kind of interesting models I think that is going to bubble out of blockchain technology. And sort of the one interesting thing about Bitcoin is it kind of shows you that this coin-powered or token-powered model, when you participate in a network to secure the protocol and secure the transactions between parties. Everyone's heard of mining fees, and yeah, there are these fees taken, but they're awarded to someone different in the network every single time. So, there's not just the rich getting richer, some big bank just taking all the fees. So that's one aspect that people like about it. And then the other thing people like is that the reward for kind of participating and securing the network is paid out in the currency of the network. So by basically participating in the network, so whether you're securing the miners or whatever, you're basically kind of earning in that network's currency, which again kind of issues new currency and bolsters the price of the currency. So it's kind of like a token-powered business models. But whereas before you just had basically one big bank kind of taking fees out of everything everyone else wanted to do with each other, which is fundamentally peer-to-peer. So I don't know, that was a lot of gobbledygook, but I hope that kind of makes sense.
Thank you, Matt. Let's hear from Patrick.
Well, I've got 2 things. So I think one thing that it solves right away is digital scarcity. So, and that's one of the ways that actually I got into Bitcoin. Well, one of the ways that my friend tried to explain to me Bitcoin, I was like, that's garbage. It's never going to work. So it was back in 2014, end of 2013, and he's like, man, he's like, hi man, he's like, great guy, absolutely amazing. He's like, dude, Bitcoin, next best thing. I'm like, what is it? Explain it to me. And he's not very technical. So it's well, it's this file that you have on your computer, and it's money, and you can transfer that money to the people. And I'm like, okay. And I was like, yeah, and the file's encrypted. I'm like, okay. It's yeah, it's cool. I'm like, okay, sweet. So I thought nothing of it. I'm first of all, that if it's a file on a computer, sounds like you can make copies of it. So you've got millions of Bitcoins already. And the transfer of it and the encryption is okay, this doesn't make sense to me. I kind of put it off to the side. But then at one point in my chance, I started actually looking deeper into it and seeing how it works. And how it works is very different, and it makes it so you actually can have a set amount of Bitcoins that everyone agrees to. So that's the first thing, is like, you can make something scarce in a network, in the internet at this point. That's amazing, because before it's copying files, you can always do that, you know, like Sony was trying to solve the whole thing with Blu-ray, that you can copy them very easily. Same thing for any like VHS, anything like that. It was, everyone copies it easily and just distributes it. With Bitcoin, at least it was the beginning of actually making it scarce and making it so you can't do that. Everyone has to agree on who has what. That's quite amazing. Everyone has to agree that you have 1, that I have 10, that you have 100. That's, to me, was like, wow. That was the moment I was like, okay, I have to go deeper into this. So that's one of them. That with that, of course, you have multiple different things. So like Cryptokitties, for example, that's you only have one Cryptokitty, and then like as a special one that has a French mustache. Boom, you've got your Cryptokitty, it's yours, and then you can transfer it as much as you want. Everyone agrees that you have the Cryptokitty with the mustache. Cool. Another one that actually, it's a very recent event that happened. Was, so has everyone heard of the whole scandal that happened in China with the vaccines? How this one big pharmaceutical essentially was making rabies and other kind of vaccines, but they were doing it with not the right amount of ingredients, so it was kind of like a lower end rabies vaccine, and there was a whole bunch of like apparently fillers or something in there. And this went, like this news when it came out, like went crazy on Weibo, crazy on WeChat. People were like sending news everywhere, but of course the Great Firewall of China and the censorship people decided to start to remove that from the social channels. They were really, really good at it, and they were able to actually remove it fully from social media. Now this one person, I don't know who it is, but I think it's quite amazing. What he did was essentially created an Ethereum transaction with the data field being the article, sent it to the network, and now you've got this article that's there, and it's there forever as long as the network exists. You can go in it, you can actually like go and change it to like, well, UTF-8, the format, and actually read the article in Mandarin. I can't do it, but I find that pretty amazing. So the censorship resistance right there, already that is quite amazing. So those are my two little things.
Yeah, so we spoke about Cryptokitties. I mean, Cryptokitties is a lot of fun, it's very playful, but what we have learned on our journey is that it does kind of expose us to a lot of real world ideas and ways of thinking. And one of the most interesting things for a lot of us that we've seen in the past few months is how it could impact the creative industry. I mean, the creative industry ownership is a very difficult thing nowadays, especially with digital arts, music, visual arts, you know. It's so easy for your creations to just get ripped off and made millions of copies and issued for free. And it's difficult. And one thing the Cryptokitties have explored really well is that true ownership of a digital assets. You know, what does it mean for somebody to own a piece of art, right? And what does it mean for the artists themselves? Right? They have spent lots of time, lots of effort designing, creating, doing all these things, putting it up there. It lives on the blockchain now as a token, and somebody else could own it. And there is an agreement there. The network knows, everybody knows, and there is nobody else that can own that legally. Another thing that came up as a result of that was not immediately obvious to us, but we're exploring now, is the extensibility of digital assets. What is that? Extensibility in the sense that if I own a digital asset and you as another creative want to collaborate or extend upon it, you can create another digital asset that also can have some type of ownership and some kind of association and belonging. And that's something that we've explored recently with third-party applications, with Cryptokitties specifically, where I could own a cat and then I could buy some of the digital asset for that cat, and then there's an association there on the blockchain as well. And these are very fundamental and simple ideas, and we are exploring them in a very playful way. But it does open the train of thought down the road to this type of digital ownership, digital asset management, does that mean in the future or in the present as well?
Thank you. Do you know any cases, like practical case study that's already implemented, or somebody who already is working on any of the real solution?
There are some practical cases that I've seen. One very recently was regarding the United Nations and some refugees, and the UN wanted an easy way to deliver, I guess, food stamps to refugees without having to go through multiple third parties. And then, of course, refugees who have no identity in the countries where they end up, there's no passport, there's no way of identifying themselves. How do they survive? How do they receive aid quickly, efficiently, and so that they can get going? So what the UN did is that one division of the UN, they rolled a private blockchain and delivered the assets over the blockchain to the refugees. And there was no like third parties to come and take massive taxes or pay cuts out of it. It was very quick and efficient and very useful.
Yeah, they found out that they, in that article, I read that too, they saved 90% of their costs just to deliver food stamps to people. And they're using people's irises as, I guess, their secret key. I'm not sure exactly how it worked, but that one is a pretty amazing one. Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, another use case, and that I think is quite amazing, is like just remittances, like just being able to send over value over a network to someone out in the world, especially for let's say a lot of cases where you have your family is in a developing world and you're in a developed world, to be able to generate a lot of revenue and being able to send it down to the family. Usually you go through like Western Union or you go through like Money Mart, whatever other companies there are for that. Well, they take a lot of money out of that, a lot of money that could actually benefit those families out in third world countries very, very well. So if you're able to really reduce the amount of fees there, I think that's already quite amazing. So that's the first one that it's like, duh, thank you. It's like absolutely amazing. Yeah.
There's a story that Andreas Antonopoulos is like a Bitcoin megaphone. He often talks about this story where basically they're teaching young women to code in Afghanistan, and basically they earn money online by basically making websites for people, and they earn it in Bitcoin. Then that Bitcoin goes into a multi-signature wallet because basically women can't really kind of own a bank account, at least not sovereignly in Afghanistan. So that means basically that, if they're arranged marriage when they're 15, 16, whatever, and then they're basically, their husband can just like walk into the bank and be like, give me all that money. So basically, the women pool their money together in a multi-signature wallet, which means that basically you need to satisfy the condition. Let's say there's like, 13 women, you need to kind of satisfy a condition. Okay, it's got to be, 7 of them out of the 13 in order to move any of the funds. So they all get together, they work cooperatively, and then they raise money to sort of pay people to basically get them out of the country. So people can get out of like tough spots, and then just like a straight case would be some of the aid that's happening in Venezuela right now. People are basically sending all different types of cryptocurrencies into the country so that people can basically hedge against the inflation that's happening there. So those are some cool, empowering cases that are, I guess, native to the technology.
Yeah, I like it. So we'll move right now to a different things, which is we already have so many developers here in the room. We'll move, give us like information about how you can become a blockchain developer and how we can make this move from being a developer, which is you have here so many people, and if you can.
Sure. Maybe you could just talk about my journey. So my background is as a developer as well, just like you guys. We have so much in common. I'm just kidding. So basically, I'll lighten up the room. So basically, I I went on a camping trip, and basically all I took with me was like video tutorials on like how to write Ethereum smart contracts and how to build decentralized applications. And I had this camper van, and basically I went driving up the Sunshine Coast. You guys know where that is, like Gibson's and Powell River and stuff. So I went like all the way up the Sunshine Coast, it's going this way. And basically for 6 nights and 7 days, all I did was I read the entire Solidity documentation, which is like 170 pages at the time. And I had all the developer tools installed so I could use them offline and stuff. But during the days I would like pop into a cafe and like hang out for a few hours and like get any resources that I didn't already have. But basically I spent like the whole morning at a lake and then just reading and just trying out different things and experimenting. Really just learning the whole thing, like front to back. So maybe that doesn't work for everybody. If you guys have jobs, you got bills to pay, things like that. However, I would encourage you, and sort of what struck me was at the time I just knew I had to drop everything and learn everything I could about this. The Ethereum ecosystem and this whole writing smart contracts really helped to kind of round out my knowledge about blockchain. I think, Patrick, you got in a bit earlier, so you had like some Bitcoin background. But yeah, I started with Ethereum, and then I had to backfill everything that had happened since 2009, or even it was sort of proposed before that. The white paper came out in 2008. But I had to sort of backfill all that stuff, all the cryptography stuff, and figure all this out. So that it was good to just stop everything for a week and just, maybe tell them you're sick. Yeah, just really put your head down for a bit and really learn about kind of the ins and outs and how it all works. And then from there, it's a lot, like the ecosystem is developing, and decentralized applications. So if you want to build like a peer-to-peer marketplace, if you want to build something on top of Cryptokitties, a lot of that has to do with basically user experience. So there are a couple of applications built on top of Cryptokitties already. One of them is Kitty Racer, so where people like already have their cats, they're bringing them to this website and they can like race the cats against each other. So it's kind of like another layer on top of what is already there on the blockchain. This they're called non-fungible tokens because no two are the same, so they're not exactly one-to-one fungible or tradable. Anyway, so yeah, if you want to build those, I would argue that you should look for articles that are sort of about the intersection of UX and blockchain and building decentralized applications, because that's an area that's just kind of really taking off right now, and it's an area with a lot of challenges, I think if you get into it, you kind of if you're really passionate about it, you can definitely kind of participate in the space that way as well. And this goes for people who are just UX designers. You don't have to be a coder. You just work out some cool flows that are better than what everyone else is doing, and there you go.
Patrick.
Yeah, essentially, so pick a lake and study.
That's it, simple.
No, so a lot of it is going to be, well, first of all, take the course. That's a good start. So there's a lot of self-learning. So you just like you go off and you actually read the whole documents and stuff. To be quite frank, Solidity is not a hard language per se. It's a few keywords that you have to understand. It's a few differences with, like, let's say JavaScript or something like that you have to understand. And then from there, you can probably learn it in a few days. The one thing that's sets you apart, or at least like at the very least you can call yourself close to a Solidity developer, is that you have to understand all the concepts around it. This is the one thing with JavaScript, you don't really have to understand like what's happening deep down. It's better if you do, because then you can actually like be more performant. But with Solidity, what's happening is that you have to understand the machine that it's running on before it's actually you can actually do something with it. So why can't you do random numbers in Solidity? Why, like, what is like time.now? What is, like, let's say date.now in JavaScript? What is that in blockchain, in the blockchain environment? All of that, like, if you understand also, why do I need X amount of confirmations? What's happening with that? What state? If you understand that, then you can like kind of call yourself like knowledgeable to a certain degree, but it's really understanding the concepts. Once you get those, then the language will come really easily. The language itself is not hard. A lot of it is going to be reading articles, reading Stack Overflow like you've all done before, going on different GitHubs, seeing how people are doing things, going on Reddit and like asking questions on XYZ. The one thing to be very mindful of that's actually super hard is to focus. There are so many different technologies out there, there are so many different protocols they can go to. If you stay focused on one and go deep on one, you'll be way ahead of the curve because there's so much information right now. It's really hard to keep up. You essentially have to like drop everything else to be able to just keep up with what's happening on an everyday basis. So staying focused on one thing and then also just learning the concepts thoroughly will make you at least like knowledgeable enough to be able to get to the next level.
Nick, would you like to
So just to, I guess, add a little bit more to all that. To be a blockchain developer is not what it means to write smart contracts, which is what Mark was saying. There's a lot, like, in order for blockchain to be widely adopted, and it's not right now, it is extremely far from widely adopted despite its popularity. For it to be widely adopted, it needs to be consumer friendly. And we're a long way off from that. When you want to make things consumer friendly, there's a lot of design, a lot of user experience, a lot of understanding user behavior, understanding how users interact with devices or products, and that is all under the umbrella of blockchain development, and it's extremely important. When we built Cryptokitties, the smart contracts that were developed and deployed were written, they were audited, and they were deployed, and then that's it. Because of the immutable state of blockchain, there is no more additions to those smart contracts that we can make. But we've been working steadily on the rest of Cryptokitties ever since. How do you grow the game? How do you understand where users' pain points are? How do you listen to the community and grow? There's a lot more to it than just say writing solidity. Of course, that's a very important part. You want to have a contract with no bugs because otherwise people might lose money. You want to have a contract that's performance, otherwise people might be overspending on certain transactions. So that is extremely important, fundamental to it. But don't lock yourself into that either, Think about what are the applications. We were speaking a few minutes ago about real-world applications. Think about those, Think about how can they really benefit a user? What can we do to make this useful for them?
Oh, you still going?
Go ahead.
I had a question for you. I know that you guys have certain functions that can be called in the Cryptokitties contract.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys do that on purpose, or did you guys forget that you do on purpose so other people can interact with the contract?
That's a good question, and it actually exposes a few interesting things about blockchain development. Now, blockchain is public domain, right? And it is public data, and as a result, smart contracts are as well. I think you could prioritize them. We have one of our contracts, which is the gene science contract, which is hidden. It's not open source, but it's not open source, so nobody can see the code, but the functions are still there, right? And that's kind of the beauty of it in a way, is that if I was speaking earlier about centralization versus decentralization. If Axiom or Cryptokitties, the company, decided, like if we folded, we went bankrupt, everybody said screw it, this kind of stuff, everything would still exist, and the contracts would still exist as well, which means that game players could continue to play the game, and anybody else could rebuild Cryptokitties the exact same way, because the data is all there, the contracts are all there, the functionality is all there. And there are actually people who do not use Cryptokitties.co to play the game. They just use the contracts directly. They're running the participants in the network. They're running their little wallet and node on their computer. because of that, they're able to communicate with the blockchain directly. They don't need a website to do that. They have their wallet, they have their node. They just go to the website to browse and look at the images of their cats. So it's not that we did it on purpose or not on purpose. It's the way it is. That's one of the beauties of it as well. One of the good things about that is that it really kind of leverages the community to help as well. So we had a setback about 3 days after we launched. Cryptokitties spiked in popularity like crazy. There was way too many transactions being attempted. It was a big rush and craze, and we didn't anticipate it. And the software that allows you to run like an Ethereum node, it was just crashing. It couldn't handle the volume of transactions. They were timing out, the transaction pool was getting clogged, and people's transactions were getting stuck. And one of the core functions, which we offset the cost of that function being run, it was not running, and that was actually the giving birth of the cats. People were stuck with no cats for a few days, and it was, we were kind of like, well, what's going on? We had no idea. But because that function is publicly available, there were actually a series of just enthusiasts who figured out some of the problems and emailed us, but started running that function as well on their own time, because there was a reward for running that function. And that was so interesting to us as developers as well. I mean, building a product and having it be adopted is great, but then on the developer side of things, to see the sort of developer camaraderie was super interesting. And that's what we find in blockchain now, is that there's a huge sense of camaraderie in the development area. People really want each other to succeed and to press forward and to grow the industry, and they just break out of the kind of echo chamber and to reach the masses. So there's a lot of things to think about as opposed to just the smart contracts or just the tokens or whatever. We at Axiom, we always say, think about the user first, and then let that inform the decisions. So
you made some of those functions public just so other users could play around with them without being.
They're public because they have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't mean like the source code.
I mean the functions. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the source code, some of it's public and some of it's not, but the functions are public because of that's just the nature of the blockchain. If they weren't public, then it would be kind of removing the whole decentralization aspect of it.
Any other questions? Before I continue, I will give the space for you guys before I will end.
I got more questions. Are you guys working on any other blockchain platforms? Like, have you guys heard? I'm sure you guys have heard of last anyways of EOS.
No, we are currently focused on Cryptokitties will live on Ethereum forever. I mean, we can talk about that after. Maybe EOS is a controversial topic.
We don't know if you want to get benefit out of the conversation.
It's a good point that there are other smart contract platforms. It's a very good point. I think one thing you want to look at as a developer getting into, especially a whole new topic like this, both Patrick and Nick and myself, we raised that it's a lot about user experience. There's a lot of challenges besides just getting this contract out of the blockchain that's going to enforce some sort of token scarcity between users or some sort of non-fungible token like a unique asset like a cat or whatever it may be. The smart contract part is not like the incredibly difficult part. It's sort of like everything around that. But one thing you're going to want to make sure of is that that's super secure. And you kind of, as a developer, you have to look at like the ecosystem. Like if I were to tell you guys, hey, can you guys spin me up a prototype of a mobile app, right? Like, what are you going to use? Are you going to use like, you know, are you going to do it native? Or are you going to do it like mobile web because it's just a prototype? And if so, what framework are you going to use? You know, are you going to go to GitHub and use the framework that has 4 stars and like 2 contributors? Or are you going to use React, the thing with like 50,000 stars and, you know, gobs of contributors and some giant awful company that lost 20% of its value today behind it? No, I'm just kidding. I have friends who work at Facebook. I sent them messages on Facebook Messenger and I asked them, hey, how are you stock options? LOL. I'm just that guy. Sorry. But anyways, long story short, you really want to look at the developer ecosystem is what I'm getting at. So there was this guy, he is from Consensus, which is a very, very, very large Ethereum consultancy, who basically said that Ethereum has 30x the developer community than any other blockchain project. But take that with a grain of salt. I mean, there are amazing technologies out there, and there's more kind of popping up every day. As Patrick said, you can't even keep up with it. There's going to be some really groundbreaking stuff, but for right now, yeah, the developer ecosystem and the tooling and everything to just get started and kind of like, you know, make a sort of a sample DApp, decentralized application. It's all right there in Ethereum. It's super easy. You just download it and kind of mess around. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't be looking into other ecosystems.
So let me go to one question, which is how do you envision this decentralized world?
That's the big one. You guys want to go first?
If there is no question from the audience, so we can.
So I did speak earlier about the difference between a centralized authority versus a decentralized network. And in a decentralized world, we as users and consumers of technology or products or whatever, we don't rely on third parties, and that in the future will just become like second nature to us. You know, that decentralization and trustlessness won't be this difficult concept to grasp. It would just be the norm. It would be a digital world where ownership and transfer of data is very transparent, is easy, and does not rely on third parties. And you don't have to run the risk of third parties folding or changing your data or screwing you over. And that kind of a frame of mind is applicable across the board to various products.
So I see it as actually being hard, because in a decentralized world, like so one thing that's beautiful is that it gives you back a lot of the lot of power to you. So in terms of your own data, being your own bank and things like that. That also means a lot of responsibility. It's not an easy thing to be your own bank. It's not an easy thing to own your own data and things like that. I think we're always going to have a hybrid, and we're never going to go to a fully decentralized world. That's my opinion on that. There's always going to be groups of people that would agree on specific things. One thing that I find is going to be quite interesting is, one thing right now with nations in general is that I'd like this person to run for X amount of years as your president, whatnot, or prime minister. And you have to abide by whatever they say to a certain degree for those 4 years. All you have to be able to say is if this person is elected, yes, sweet. If they've got a majority, they can do whatever they want to a certain degree. I see it as being more interactive, where there'll be more actually like kind of questions to the masses in terms of should we do this, should we not do that, and you as a person have like more choices on what to do with it. So I don't see like, let's say for example money, right? Like the Canadian dollar. I don't see the Canadian dollar like folding forever. I think it will keep existing as long as people believe in it. But now you have more choices in terms of how you want to deal with paying for something in this country, or being able to transfer money outside of this country. As long as we believe that this place, we believe in the laws that are enacted, we believe in what's happening, we're going to keep the Canadian dollar, let's say, going. I see the decentralized world as you guys, like us, having more choices, thus more responsibilities. Thus, it'll be more fragmented in general because people think differently. So going back to what I said first, I think it's going to be actually quite hard. It's going to be quite you have to be if you want to really participate in the whole thing, there's a lot of things that you have to think about, you have to enact. Of course, it all goes back to UI, UX and making it easy for people, but it's a lot of responsibility.
Just to continue on what you were saying about the balance between centralized and decentralized, and Cryptokitties is kind of a case in point, and I believe that as well. Full decentralization is, probably borderline anarchy. That's good in theory, everybody has a little bit of anarchy inside of them, which is cool, but it's probably not practical for modern societies. So finding the balance between central and decentralized is going to be a big challenge, and it's also going to be pretty important. So Cryptokitties, as an example, the art is created by our artists, and it lives in a database. The SVG, the generated SVG for a simple Cryptokitty is not on the blockchain. Something that we would like to do because we think that's a very valuable part of it, but it doesn't live on the blockchain. What does live on the blockchain is a genetic sequence. And that genetic sequence is what's used to derive the art. What's that word? Sequential. Procedure. And that's the trust that the users have kind of given to us to say, hey, we understand that you put the important thing on the blockchain, which is the ownership of the genetic sequence, the genetic makeup of these cats. And we trust you and your design team to continue to design these traits and populate the art in the database. Finding that balance is going to be super important moving forward. That's another thing that we have to think about when we think about progress, is that what can we control as a partially centralized authority? What can we tell users, and what can we guarantee them in terms of our decentralization?
Thank you.
Yeah, I tend to agree with these points. So we may be able to build more open and sort of level the playing field, kind of transparent systems. However, we did it with the internet, and what happened? Everybody kind of, pooled around fast ISPs, and then everybody just, basically said, okay, well, I'll get my email from, Hotmail, Gmail, whatever. So these things tend to re-centralize a little bit. And I don't want to be like the person that says, oh, this time it's different, because I won't say that, because it's not going to be different. Things will still kind of have to happen around some centralized stuff. But where the technology kind of plays is it plays in a couple of areas where technology, specifically software, has not been able to play before. And that goes back to what Patrick said about digital scarcity. Basically, the internet was just a protocol around exchanging information, but it was really just a gigantic copying machine, and it just made copies of information all around the world. And then basically you've got this sort of enforceable digital scarcity, which is really the benefit. This is the end kind of use of it. Now, where can you use scarcity? Well, you can use it in basically like organization, cooperation, coordination, trust. These are all the things that basically typically belong to sort of the chosen ones of governments or banks. But then basically if you take that responsibility on as a user, like Patrick also said, it's like Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, great power, great responsibility. It is a lot of power to basically have completely censorship-free money or to hold this public key, which is essentially like an inbox for money, and basically set up websites to do any transactions with anyone in the world. That's a great part of this technology, but at the end of the day, if you lose the private key that goes along with that public key, it's really just an inbox. You're not going to be able to send anything out of it anymore, because if you lose your private key, there's no bank of Bitcoin. You can't go knock on some door and be like, hey, here's my birth certificate, here's my driver's license, huh? Yeah, it's me, right?
And you lose your Bitcoin.
Yeah, you lose the ability to transfer any Bitcoin out of that. Anyway, so long story short though, just around sort of centralizing and sort of decentralization or decentralized technologies and the future and sort of how things tend to re-centralize is we got to go back to like who we are as human beings and what we've always kind of done and what we've always wanted. So what I find really interesting about this technology is what was the first thing? It was sort of these coins that are sort of like, if Patrick sends me a Bitcoin and I send him a Bitcoin, we're both back where we started, right? It's fungible. So it's basically like people back in the day, they used shells that all looked the same, or salt, or any sort of medium that was fungible. So basically, a pound of salt from one region is the same as a pound of salt from that same region. And sure, there's sort of different grades of salt and things like that. But basically, people chose that as their currency. And then the next thing people did on top of that, once the shell thing was solved, all these common-looking shells, what was the next thing that they did? Well, they made cool ornaments, and then they found really unique shells, and they kind of slapped them on these masks, and they, danced around and said, "Hey, I'm the chief." So then you get these non-fungible tokens, and I mean, in a game like Cryptokitties, there are kitties that are better than other kitties, right? And those kitties are the chief kitties, or whatever you want to call them. So there is kind of like this imposed kind of hierarchy. And so, in biology, in the world, everyone does this. You do this through signaling. When Facebook came along, I bashed it earlier, so I'll kind of give it some props. When Facebook came along, we were just figuring out how to be social online. And what happened, right? What are some of those popular Facebook pages online? Kim Kardashian and all these other people, right? We centralized around things. We centralized around people. We centralized around ideas. We kind of come together in sort of these tribes. And for whatever reason, some people are kind of, they win out. They're louder than others. So I do think that there's sort of a hybrid model coming. People in the future, in this sort of future decentralized world or hybrid centralized world, will have to be more fair, because that's ultimately the systems that we're building. But at the end of the day, some people are going to be lazy. They're not going to want to, buy a hardware wallet or remember their private keys, and they're just going to basically say, "You hold it for me."
And that's a challenge.
So from decentralized to centralized again.
We were talking about what does it entail to be a blockchain developer, and that's a big challenge, right?
Yeah.
Like if you can solve these challenges about the average user does not care about the protocols of the internet, does not care how it works. In fact, they probably don't even understand it on a low level, but still they grasp it, They grasp the concept of what it means to go on the internet and look up a web page. And to be a blockchain developer is to take these super low level technical concepts and bring that to the everyday user, where they don't have to get it, they just need to, they don't have to understand it, they just need to grasp it.
Actually, Nick said something earlier that I thought was really important, and I think that the systems that will be built, even if they do center around sort of really popular sort of pockets or services even that come out of it, like what's the Gmail of blockchain going to look like? I still think that fundamentally, because the technology is designed in a certain way, and Nick mentioned this, it sort of prevents a small group of people kind of taking over and basically kind of just changing the rules of the game on everything. So there's sort of like, even if you did join the Gmail of blockchain, there's this implied like rule set when you get into it that, and there's this implied sort of trustlessness where you don't need to trust them, you just trust in the protocol that you have with them. So I think that those systems will arise, but they'll be better than the ones that we have today.
Thank you, guys. Do you have any question? Yeah, please.
What do you think of companies like Vanbex, who are mediators in this cryptocurrency space, who act like banks in a way, and they charge you transaction fees every time?
I can do this. I mean, to be honest, this is the transition. This is how it is. Like right now, if you want to buy Bitcoin any other way, it's extremely hard or terrible UI UX.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, local Bitcoin. They've done an incredible job at making it easy for the user. Yes, they're making a huge amount of money from those fees, absolutely, but they're needed for people to actually be able to start. So I don't see them as an evil corp whatsoever. I think they're just a normal, it's just normal transition to go towards more of that centralization. And if it puts more crypto in more hands of the people, yeah, I'm cool with that.
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
You have maybe to ethical, right?
By the way, Coinbase.
So one of the
Coinbase, like, I want to hear your question, but I just wanted to say, Coinbase, kind of almost like an Amazon, reinvests a lot of that money into this space. So basically, like, they fund projects, they fund charities, like they fund a lot of stuff. Like, yeah, these guys are making a killing, but they're not like, again, like maybe that is imposed somewhat by the technology. Like the whole community around cryptocurrency, blockchain, and decentralization is, is very, despite the jokes, very like anti-Lambo. If you guys get the reference.
All right.
Yeah, my question is actually about Ethereum, against distributed system, because it's not, I'm totally against, because I know orbitally Vanbex doing something for it. I was trying to run a node on my computer, Ethereum node, back I think 1.5 years ago. I couldn't able to finish. And recently I heard that it's more than 1 terabyte. Let's say if it is truly distributed, then we have to get a consensus to get things done, and it will increase day by day. The popularity grows, the size of the distributed ledger will grow. So are we going towards more centralized place, because only let's say few computers will be able to run?
That's an
Interesting question.
It's a very good question, and I totally agree with you that there is a sort of I guess capitalist market happening now, as who could afford the hardware and who could run it cheaply. Those are the winners in this game, and that does centralize it to a few select locations and mining pools in the world.
So we're talking about the miner, or we're talking about the node? So
Well, the miner's running the nodes. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
And there is anybody can run the
Yeah.
node.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
miners, they are
Well,
more
whoever's
equipped.
running the node, whoever wants to run that node. I mean, it is becoming who has the most amount of money here, who can afford the hardware, and who could pay the electricity bills as well, right? And I think what we will see in 5 years is that blockchain, Bitcoin, and Ethereum would have been the pioneers, but they will by far not be the most efficient and the most widely adopted, right? And that problem will be solved. How do we? How are people able to run maybe partial nodes and participate in blockchains? How are people? What type of blockchains will be built in the future that will be more widely and readily adopted? That's still a mystery. It's still out there to be solved. But it's a super interesting point.
So by saying that, I just want to assure everyone I have totally faith on Italy science
Yeah,
team.
no,
I think they will be doing something like they're doing something sharing or something to ease these things. But I'm just saying, if these things goes on, then
It's a valid.
But I think there are so many other things going on also, like not only Ethereum. So there is
It's a valid concern
there
though. Well, Ethereum is currently
Yeah.
most widely adopted, at least on the consumer level blockchain, right?
There's a great there's a great podcast called Epicenter. It covers a lot of the topics in the space, and they don't just talk about Ethereum; they talk about everything. And they had on these guys that started this new protocol called Coda. Pretty interesting stuff, and the reason why is because basically, in order to be a validating node, you don't need to download this whole blockchain. Basically, what you get is you get a proof, and then you just need basically these Merkle trees, which are also quite small, of any of the accounts involved in the transactions of the block that you want to validate. And this zero knowledge proof that you get of the whole blockchain is basically just it's kind of like taking this entire blockchain and then basically distilling it down into just a tiny little proof that basically says all this data is there and it does look like this. So it's pretty fascinating, like cryptography. To be honest, like some of it's just totally over my head. I understand the basic concept of zero knowledge proofs, but the math gets a little hairy. But so that's an example. I think to Nick's point, like, does anyone use Netscape? I mean, it was a cool browser back in the day, the little asteroids going around the end. But I mean, it's just not around anymore, you know. So I mean, new things do come out. There will still be some economic incentive to kind of be running on Ethereum, and I do agree with you. When things like real threats to blockchain come, like the size of the database, or something like quantum computers, which everybody talks about, but I don't know, we'll have to wait 5 or 10 years. When real threats do come, the developers around the blockchain will spring into action. And I mean, they always have this idea of forking too, so you take a snapshot at a certain moment in time, and then basically you split off and you say, we're gonna start from here. So you could like pre-compute everything in Ethereum up to a certain point, and then basically say, okay, does the entire community trust what everyone's balance is, what the storage and state of every smart contract is at this point in time? Okay, great, we've got it down to like a couple hundred megabytes. Now let's go and start from there, or something to that effect. So I think there's schemes that they're going to work on to do that, but they always want to be able to do that in this trustless, provable way that doesn't sort of benefit any one group of people.
Last question, if you have. Yeah.
I have a question. Do you guys think in the future that everything will be on the blockchain, or just be certain industries? And also, do you guys think like side chains may be the future of blockchain, or is it just the same thing as always?
I think side chains are really cool. State channels, so side chains, state channels, little class machines, whatever you want to call them. Basically, these are, for people that don't know, these are sort of like, me and Patrick want to basically gamble against each other, and we want to gamble all night long, right? So basically, me and Patrick are going to deposit like the equivalent of $1,000 USD each into a smart contract, and then we're going to jump out onto a centralized server, and basically, it's just going to go, like Patrick makes an action, I make an action, so it's just going to go like back and forth. So this provably fair game gets played out between me and Patrick. Now what's ensuring that Patrick can't leave the table and walk away with all the money? Well, basically we're signing these transactions back and forth, and the server that's running, they can't take the funds either. So we both locked it up in the smart contract. Now we have to return to the smart contract with essentially like what's called a Merkle proof, but it's basically just kind of like this compressed proof of all of the transactions between me and Patrick in order to exit out of that smart contract on the main blockchain and walk away with the money. So this works in scenarios where nobody cares what me and Patrick did all night long, but basically they care about the result. So they want to know that, like, is Matt or Patrick a better poker player, right? So that would be burned into the blockchain because we both entered with $1,000, but maybe Patrick left with $1,500 and I left with $500, right? So that works great for those situations. I don't think everything's going to be on a blockchain either, just to answer that question. I think only things that matter. So basically, what I mean by that is basically scarcity, finances, data. Data is sort of like, it's cheap to copy for sure, but to know who owns it and who owns the rights and who gets to see it, that's becoming more and more of an issue in our lives. And this concept of a zero knowledge proof as well, that is another technology that will allow people to kind of control who gets to see what of their data. So it's really an interesting space. Not everything's going to be on a blockchain, but the really important kind of bits, the things that we really want to know, are sort of guaranteed data points for trustless transactions, where we want to kind of eliminate risk and counterparties and intermediaries out of the equation. I think that'll be on a blockchain.
Yeah, on the part of will everything be on the blockchain? Absolutely not. Not everything needs the blockchain whatsoever. Blockchain is great for any transaction, any transactional data that needs to happen. So it could be financial, it could be supply chain, going through the whole supply chain, what's going on. Could also be articles. So that's one of the things. So going back to you saying, like right now, the size of the node of an archival node is over a terabyte. That's a huge problem, right? That's also because there's a lot of garbage data in there. There's a lot of garbage data that we create in general. What's actually important and what you want to keep on the blockchain is the important data. So for your Cryptokitties, you don't keep those SVGs of all those kitties, the thousands of kitties that exist. You don't keep them in the blockchain. That's hundreds of thousands. That's A, extremely expensive, B, extremely careless in the sense of like that's useless data to have on the blockchain. So going back to the example I had with the article, what I found was actually interesting about that transaction. So the article, the Chinese vaccine problem, what's interesting is that the person knew, like, if you're a good citizen in the blockchain world, you will not spam the blockchain whatsoever. You won't add like crazy amounts of data for no reason. The person that actually created this transaction actually sent a value transaction to someone about it and gave a really, really high price to the miner because they knew, well, at least that's my thought pattern on it, that's whatever, but they knew that like this is data that normally should not be there, but this is their only last resort for them to be able to disseminate this news. That's important data. That's because you're being censored, you're able now to have this censorship resistant kind of like data set that people can see now. Only very important stuff will be on the blockchain. Not everything needs to be there. Your resume certainly does not need to be on the blockchain. And in terms of like plasma chains, I think it's definitely application-specific blockchains. I think it absolutely will be a huge thing. And you can decide like, I really like this application. I want to be a node in it, and I want to be able to like profit from this. Like what I can see is that this plasma chain can actually become in itself a company, and you can profit from that. So you can see like different, like you've got the main chain that like is the one source of truth, and then you can spin up side chains that can actually become companies themselves that have a specific application that's run on it, and you can decide yourself, hey, I want to be like a shareholder to a certain degree. That means being a node that participates in the whole thing, and I think that's going to be huge. Also, unplugs the main one. So the main one has the important data from those chains and runs as it is now. And all the small ones can have more data and more iterations on it.
All right. So thank you for all panelists. And I would like to just one thing. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to reach out?
My last name is Lockyer, as in lock your shit up or lock your door. I figured the the slogan for Launchpad is get shit done, so I figure I could say shit at least.
Okay.
So basically it's lock, Y-E-R, and I'm pretty Googleable. So that's it.
Okay, perfect, Patrick.
Got SEO here. Just Patrick at
it's organic SEO.
Organic SEO. Patrick at Vanbex.com or at PatrickGay1 on Twitter. I don't really look at my Twitter, but just do it. LinkedIn also.
Yeah, I'm also Googleable.
Available. That's a new word.
It's
First
catching
name,
up.
last name at axiom.co. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. It was really a great insight. I really get some great benefits. And there was so many stories, which is one of the stories I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I never heard about that.
Thanks for moderating.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And definitely you still have a few, maybe 10 minutes. You can still...
No, we'll jet off.
you can still connect with them, and if you want to have any additional questions, so you can still reach to them.
There's still
So thank you so much
sandwiches
for being
and
here.
beer.
And yeah, there's still sandwiches